Whenever we think about the Second World War, we imagine only the European side, Britain being bombed continuously by the Luftwaffe, Russians and Germans fighting brutal battles, and many more. But what if I told you that even Asia and the Pacific were not spared? Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing about the Pacific War or the Asia Pacific theater of World War II in which United States and its allies fought Japan to counter its expansionist ambitions. So, without further delay, let us get started. Like Europe, Japan had been suffering from the Great Depression. As a result, people lost faith in democracy and militarism began to rise in Japan. Ultimately, a militaristic government came to power with the goal of restoring Japan's greatness by force. This government also wanted to conquer nations in Asia and the Pacific to be the dominant economic power by exploiting the resources there, such as oil, rubber, and tin. Given that Japan was a country with no such resources, the military started to rapidly mobilize for a war of conquest across Asia and the Pacific. On 7th July 1937, Japanese troops marched into China, starting the Second Sino-Japanese War. Soon, most of the Chinese coast was under Japanese control. In September 1940, Japan invaded Indochina in Southeast Asia. There, they fought the French forces and successfully occupied the country. This was Japan's first major move in Southeast Asia. US, till now Japan's friend, was shocked at Japan's expansionist moves. US President Franklin D. Roosevelt then stopped selling oil to Japan. Since Japan received most of its oil from US, it faced a severe oil shortage. Initially, the Japanese wanted to settle things with the Americans peacefully. However, when Hideki Tojo, a military leader, became prime minister in October 1941, he took a far violent path since he never valued peace in his life. He ended all diplomatic negotiations with the US that had been going on before his appointment as prime minister. He wanted to knock the US Pacific Fleet out, which he saw as an obstacle to his dream of a Japanese empire. To curb the US from interfering in his expansionist plans, Tojo ordered Pearl Harbor, the main base of US Navy in the Pacific, to be attacked in order to render the US Navy unable to intervene in Japan's imperial campaign. On 7th December 1941, a Japanese fleet under Isoroku Yamamoto set out from the Japanese-controlled Kuril Islands to the island of Hawaii, where Pearl Harbor was located. 180 warplanes took off from the Japanese aircraft carriers and flew to Pearl Harbor. There, they caught the Americans by surprise and bombed the base, killing 2,403 people there. Most of the dead were military personnel present at the base. Even though a warning of a Japanese attack had been intercepted earlier, but it had been misinterpreted by the Americans, a key factor in the attack being successfully carried out. The news of the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor spread like wildfire across the United States. Normal American people who earlier wanted to keep their country out of the war were absolutely outraged by this attack. Even President Roosevelt was furious and he had decided to drop isolationism, a policy in which US had to keep out of the matters of other nations. On 8th December 1941, he signed the Declaration of War against Japan, signifying the entry of United States in the Second World War on the Allied side. By then, Japan turned its eye towards Philippines, where US had military bases. In 1942, Japan invaded the Philippines, leading to the loss of an important US base in Southeast Asia. Douglas MacArthur, an American military leader, vowed to liberate the Philippines. All captured soldiers were then taken by the Japanese to POW camps. Many of them died of thirst, hunger, and exhaustion on the way. Japan then conquered other allied colonies in Asia to make it a part of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. Soon, Japan was at its peak, but not for a longer period of time. The US quickly reorganized its air force under Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle. Within 4 months, they were ready to strike Japan back. In April 1942, American bombers flew from the Pacific to the Japanese capital of Tokyo. There, they rained down destruction on the city, leaving 50 dead and making the Japanese believe they were not invulnerable. At sea, the US Navy was slowly overpowering the Japanese Navy with its naval air power. In June 1942, Japan attacked the US at Midway, only to see that the US Air Force was prepared. Both the sides fought the Battle of Midway from 4th to 7th June 1942. The US won the battle by sinking 4 of Japan's crucial aircraft carriers, crippling the Japanese Navy and starting the pushback. This was the beginning of the end for the Empire of Japan. US military leaders then identified Japan's Achilles heel, a lack of natural resources. They developed the strategy of island hopping, in which they took one island at a time to cut Japan off from natural resources. These islands were those which were lightly defended by the Japanese. Amphibious combat was also seen for the first time in this period. Many soldiers from both US and Japan died due to tropical diseases. Without any natural resource supply, Japan's economy started to crumble and the war effort began to wither. This way, the US liberated many islands in the Pacific and pushed the frontiers of Japan's empire back. In 1944, American soldiers landed on the island of Leyte in Philippines. Japan tried to distract the US naval fleet from supporting the land attack, but they retreated due to fears of a trap set up by the Americans. Many Japanese pilots were chosen to crash their planes deliberately into American ships. They were called kamikazes, meaning divine wind in Japanese. But since most were shot out of the sky, this plan remained ineffective. Leyte was captured by US, and this was the first step into the liberation of Philippines. Not only Americans, but Australians, New Zealanders, and native people also fought against the Japanese, even before Leyte. On 8th May 1945, Germany surrendered to the Allies, ending the war in Europe. That day was known as Victory in Europe Day. However, Japan still did not give up and kept on fighting the Allies in Asia and the Pacific. American bombers kept on targeting industrial infrastructure in Japan, but the nation did not seem to surrender due to a cultural belief that accepting defeat was a matter of dishonor in war. This was called the Bushido Code. At first, the US decided to invade mainland Japan to end the war. Okinawa and Iwo Jima, two strategic islands, had already been taken by the Americans to get a military base close to Japan. But the sheer determination of Japanese people led to US dropping the plan and developing a highly destructive weapon, the atom bomb. Since the entry of US in the war, the Manhattan Project worked on the weapon, and finally, on 16 July 1945, they tested it successfully in Alamogordo, New Mexico. US gave Japan an ultimatum to either surrender or face destruction. But when Japan did not agree, the US finally dropped the first nuclear bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, Nagasaki was nuked when Japan still did not agree to the ultimatum after Hiroshima. Total 150,000 to 240,000 died in both nuclear attacks. Just before Nagasaki was attacked, the USSR broke its neutrality pact with Japan, which had been signed in 1941. Joseph Stalin, the Soviet leader, promised to declare war on Japan 3 months after Germany surrendered. He had kept the promise by sending the Red Army to Manchuria, Korea, and the Kuril Islands. Meanwhile, the Japanese government, fearing a two-front invasion by US and USSR, announced the surrender on 15 August 1945, and on 2 September they surrendered, ending World War II. World War II in Asia and the Pacific claimed many lives, with innocent civilian deaths exceeding the military deaths. This was far higher than the number of deaths in Europe. More people in Asia had to leave their homes in order to be safe from the dangers of war, compared to Europe's 40 million. Urban centers such as Manila in Philippines and Tokyo in Japan were completely destroyed. Above, you can see the data showing losses from each country involved in World War II. As you can see here, the Asian countries have higher death tolls. We all know about the Holocaust, where the Nazis systematically murdered Jews and other people they saw as subhuman. But the Japanese were no different. They had murdered many prisoners of war by letting them starve in horrible conditions in POW camps. Even civilians were not spared. Initially, when the Japanese invaded the Allied colonies, they saw them as their liberators from Western rule. However, they were about to make people's lives hell. Many were killed on the spot by the soldiers, put to forced labor in mines, and even got looted by the Japanese. Many officers and leaders, including Hideki Tojo, were tried for their crimes after the war. All of us know what happened in Europe after World War II. Germany was occupied by the Allies and divided into the Communist East and Capitalist West. But did you know that even Asia was restructured? Well, communist governments were taking root in many nations with the support of the Soviets. Mao Zedong rose in 1949 as the first communist leader of China after defeating the nationalists in a brutal civil war. Korea was divided into the capitalist South under US influence and communist North under Soviet influence. And Vietnam rallied under the communist leader Ho Chi Minh after the war. Many colonial powers were weakened by the war, leading to decolonization everywhere. The Pacific War was clearly the most devastating theater of World War II. It saw many armies battle each other desperately in order to take back territory. Yet, all of us forget that World War II was not a mere European war. It was far deadlier in the Asia Pacific region. Thank you for watching this video. To know more about this topic, watch the documentary World War II in the Pacific now on Curiosity Stream or read the book With the Old Breed by E.B. Sledge. That is all for today. See you in the next video.